Ladies and gentlemen, and everyone in between, let me discuss climate and disaster risk financing by starting with the story of Mayor Margal of Salcedo, Eastern Samar.
Doon sa traditional insurance na kinakailangan mo mag-submit ng mga documentary requirements para lang ma-approve mo that you can claim the insurance.
Mayor Margal was just a first-termer fresh mayor in 2013 when Yolanda struck. This mayor, I was able to interview for an Oxfam project, and I could see that he was passionate, dedicated to service people with respect to the impacts of Yolanda. Yet, he faced the major challenge of being unable to access climate funds to address the aftermath of Yolanda. He is the reason, along with his constituents, why we need to discuss climate and disaster financing. I'm sure stories abound regarding the impacts of climate change and disasters for each one of you. I've already mentioned Yolanda. I've come across a study early in the 2000s regarding the impact of sea level rise. In that particular study, it shows the possibility that with sea level rise, the sea might invade Cagayan Valley. Therefore, if it continues to rise, we will not have a Cagayan Valley, we will have a Cagayan Gulf. We need to understand that the climate change impacts are accelerating. We have heard lately of the acceleration of glacial melting in Greenland, in the North Pole. What this means is that we, as an archipelagic country with so many vulnerable coastal areas, might face those threats from the sea. And coupled with sea level rise, and whenever a catastrophic typhoon or a super typhoon invades the Philippines, we will have more Yolandas. Another impact I've come across is the farmlands in Tinambak, Camarines Sur. A coastal agricultural area, about an estimate of 100 hectares, has been invaded by the sea already. Therefore, for that number of hectares, about 100, you cannot plant palay anymore. Another story that we might want to hear about is the story of the Badyaos. Traditionally, the Badyaos live near the Tawi-Tawi area. But now, they are forced to migrate because that area is actually a climate hotspot. So I've come across Badyaos who have already resettled in Batangas. And I'm sure you know their stories, especially during Christmas time, when they are forced to go to urban areas to earn a living. These are clear impacts of climate change and disasters. And these are the very reasons why we need to make sure that we have a clear, responsive policy on climate and disaster risk financing. Our policymakers, especially at the national level, need to make sure that we have funds, and this policy is enabling. What does this mean? It means that we have a full financial arsenal, a full component, a full range of adaptation funds to serve the needs of the vulnerable communities who will face the impacts, some of which I've already mentioned. Why is this necessary? Again, especially based on recent projections, we now have a climate emergency. Meaning to say, those impacts, climate change and disaster impacts that are yet projected to happen, say, in 2050, may happen within 5 to 12 years. For a country like the Philippines, which is highly vulnerable with a lot of its populations in coastal areas, this is an alarm. Based on that alarm, we need to make sure that we are able to set aside funds, we are able to create adaptation funds for the benefit of those who will be hit by these impacts. And what is this policy? In order to make sure that we are able to identify the entire range of climate and disaster impacts, we need to make sure that we have a complete national climate and disaster risk assessment. And this is where the academe, especially those experts from the University of the Philippines, in coordination or with the help of state universities and colleges and other experts in other academic institutions, should all pitch in to make sure that we have a national picture of the entire impact of climate change and disasters. If we have that national picture, then we will be able to see exactly which of our local governments will first face the impacts of, say, an accelerated sea level rise. Why is that necessary? It's the survival of those vulnerable communities at stake. Again, this may happen at bay. We cannot let our institutions just sit by without recognizing this climate emergency. We need to make sure that our national agencies, our local governments are adequately capacitated. Again, we need to make sure that there's a climate risk assessment and then there is a creation of a full arsenal of financing weapons to address the impacts of climate change. And to complete the picture for this policy reform, we need to make sure that there is a national implementation program and roadmap to assure that local vulnerable communities will be able to access the said adaptation funds. Local vulnerable communities, again, do not have the capacity and the funds required to make sure that our people who are vulnerable to such climate impacts are able to adapt. One example of an arsenal, of a financing arsenal, is risk transfer. In simple terms, risk transfer is making sure that the poorest of the poor, our vulnerable people, farmers, fisherfolk, urban poor, are able to avail of insurance. So we can equate risk transfer with insurance. This is not yet available as a matter of policy, as a matter of an enabling policy for our vulnerable communities. We need to make sure, let me emphasize, that the full financing arsenal for adaptation, for climate and disaster impacts are addressed by providing for public funds. Why do we need to make sure that this gets done? In closing, let me give you the voice of the victim of Yolanda.
Yung time kasi noon na November 7, yung pinapalabas kasi sa sa news, puro na lang yung kay Napoles, walang update sa Yolanda ba. Tapos hindi naman namin alam yung kung ano ba yung storm surge na sinasabi nila na tubig pala yun, hindi na lang na pala may kumbaga magta-tidal wave pala na ganyan.
Nung araw na nangyari yun sa amin, hindi ko talaga alam kung anong gagawin ko sa mga anak ko. Kasi po, sabi ko, saan po kung ano po ba talaga ang nangyari sa ano po natin. Hindi ko talaga makakalimutan nangyari yun. Kasi pag umuulan, parang yung mga anak ko may phobia na. Sabi ng mga anak ko, Mama, baka magbaha na naman. Lalong-lalo na po ngayon, ma'am, palaging umulan. Natatakot talaga ako pag bumabaha na.
It is for these people that we need to make sure that our generation, the present generation of policymakers, those in the academe, using the whole of government and whole of academe approach, we need to make sure that for the victims of Yolanda and all the other victims and possible victims still in the future of climate change and disaster impacts, that they will be able to thrive under these conditions. Ladies and gentlemen, it is the duty of the present generation to make sure that the next generation of Filipinos will have a fighting chance to survive in a climate-challenged world.